The mid-1990s were a time of technological evolution in gaming, with developers experimenting with full-motion video and cinematic storytelling to push the medium into uncharted territory. Among these experiments was D, a surreal horror adventure that blended unsettling atmosphere, cryptic puzzles, and groundbreaking visuals into an experience unlike anything else at the time. Released in 1995 and developed by Kenji Eno's Warp Studio, D told the haunting story of Laura, a young woman drawn into a nightmarish, otherworldly hospital. As players guided her through this unsettling journey, they faced a race against time to uncover the truth behind the horrors within. With its eerie tone, minimalist interface, and real-time progression, D stood out as a harbinger of narrative-driven horror games to come. Today, we're unraveling the mystery behind D, exploring its innovative design, its place in gaming history, and the enigmatic legacy of its creator, Kenji Eno. So dim the lights, steel your nerves, and join us for today's haunting trip down memory card lane. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I hope these words find you safe and well. Hello and welcome to the 241st episode of our video game history podcast, A Trip Down Memory Card Lane. Each week we'll tell you a story relevant to the current week in gaming history. It can be about a game or the people who have created it. It can be about a console or the technology that brought it to life. We often talk about the companies that bring it all together, making our hobby video games a reality. While telling you each story, we hope to teach you something new about the topic, what it took from the world as its inspiration, or what it gave back to the world in its legacy. Today, we are delving into D, the eerie 1995 adventure game that blurred the lines between psychological horror and cinematic storytelling. Known for its unsettling atmosphere and unique real-time gameplay mechanic, D captivated players with its chilling tale and dark secrets. I'm David Casson, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host, who'd probably try to negotiate with the ghost instead of solving the puzzles. He's my brother, Rob Casson. Rob, do you think that you'd uncover the dark secrets of D, or just kind of, run around screaming louder than the sound effects?
Well, the latter is definitely going to happen, but I think we'll be able to uncover the secrets.
Are you a jump scare guy? Like, do they get you with that stuff?
It's 50-50.
Yeah,
I will not pretend like I'm big, strong man, never get scared. I absolutely get the shit scared out of me in these games. More often, I just feel apprehensive, and I can normally tell a lot of jump scares, but I have gotten got.
Yeah, they get me too. Definitely. I definitely scream like a little girl.
True that.
Truer words have never been spoken.
You're right.
That might be the most factual statement ever on the podcast, Dave.
Okay. Yeah.
Done. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. Well, do you have any familiarity with D?
Other than the letter, no.
Other than the letter, no. Well, then we have a lot to cover today. We are going to be taking a look at the video game D and its creator, Kenji Eno, who we visited before. Very, very, very interesting figure. I love talking about him. I will use any excuse to talk about him. And the company that he formed, Warp. So we got a lot to cover today. But before we get to that, why don't you share with all of our listeners what else happened during this current week in gaming history?
Kicking it off on April 9th, 1984, Chunsoft was founded in Japan, a company that would go on to play a major role in shaping both the visual novel and dungeon-crawling RPG genres. Originally known for developing the first 5 Dragon Quest games for Enix, Chunsoft helped define the JRPG formula that would become a staple of the industry. The studio later expanded into the mystery and adventure space with titles like 999, 9 Hours, 9 Persons, 9 Doors, and AI, the Somnium Files, as well as the Mystery Dungeon series. In 2012, Chunsoft merged with visual novel publisher Spike to form Spike Chunsoft, a name now synonymous with cult classics and compelling storytelling. The company continues to innovate across genres with a legacy deeply rooted in narrative driven experiences and genre defining gameplay. We learned all about the origins of Dragon Quest in episode 143, so there's plenty of opportunities to learn more in our archives.
Yes, indeed.
Indeed. Next, on April 7th, 1986, Atlas was founded in Tokyo, Japan, setting the stage for its eventual rise as one of the most influential developers and publishers of JRPGs. Initially focused on producing arcade and Famicom titles, Atlas would go on to earn widespread acclaim for its Megami Tensei franchise, including the critically acclaimed Shin Megami Tensei and Persona series. Known for exploring mature themes, complex characters, and philosophical narratives, Atlas carved out a unique niche in the gaming world. Its distinct visual style, compelling storytelling, and innovative mechanics helped build a loyal global fan base, solidifying Atlas as a powerhouse in JRPG genre. We talked about the origins of the Megami Tensei series in episode 149 and Persona in episode 212, so if you want to learn more about some of the games, go check out the archives.
It's a fantastic series. The Persona series are some of the highest rated games of all time.
Indeed.
Mm-hmm.
On April 6th, 1990, Ninja Gaiden 2, The Dark Sword of Chaos, was released for the NES, continuing the saga of Ryu Hayabusa and one of the most beloved action platformer series of its time. Developed by Techno, the sequel built upon the intense, fast paced gameplay of the original while introducing new mechanics like Ryu's ability to cling to and climb walls, as well as the innovative shadow clones that mirrored the player's attack. The Dark Sword of Chaos also featured improved visuals, more cinematic cutscenes, and a darker narrative, enhancing its reputation for storytelling in a genre not typically known for it. Praised for challenging gameplay and refined controls, Ninja Gaiden 2 remains a standout title in NES history and a shining example of 8-bit action done right.
We covered the original Ninja Gaiden, and that was early on. That was early on. It is one of the first console titles to kind of have a cinematic presentation, and so it is historically important to its genre because of it. Go check it out.
Yeah, go check it out indeed. On April 12th, 2005, Jade Empire was released for the Xbox, marking BioWare's first original intellectual property following their success with licensed RPGs like Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic. Set in a fantastical world inspired by Chinese mythology and martial arts, Jade Empire blended action oriented combat with BioWare's signature storytelling and morality based decision system. Players assume the role of a martial arts student destined to confront ancient evils, with a choice driven narrative that influenced the game's ending. Though it never reached the popularity of some of BioWare's later franchises, Jade Empire was praised for its rich setting, compelling characters, and cinematic presentation. It remains a cult favorite and a unique gem in BioWare's RPG legacy.
We haven't done Jade Empire yet.
Nope.
We haven't done KOTOR yet,
Nope. Wonder
but we
why.
have. You love it every time. But I don't know. It's a mystery to me. But we have done Mass Effect, which is a BioWare game. We learned all about BioWare when we did it. So, if you're curious about the company or the Mass Effect franchise, there's an episode out there for you.
Yeah, didn't we? Isn't Bioshock one of theirs too?
Not BioWare, no.
Oh, it's just Bio. Got me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Darn.
Mm-hmm.
Well, last out for this week in gaming history on April 6th, 2006, Microsoft officially acquired Lionhead Studios, the British development team best known for creating the Fable series. Founded by industry veteran Peter Molyneux, Lionhead built a reputation for ambitious, innovation driven titles like Black and White and the movies. The acquisition came shortly after the commercial success of the original Fable on Xbox, and it signaled Microsoft's intent to strengthen its portfolio of first party developers as it ramped up support for the Xbox 360. Under Microsoft's ownership, Lionhead would go on to develop several more Fable titles, though the studio's ambitious nature sometimes clashed with corporate expectations. While the acquisition gave Lionhead access to more resources and stability, it also marked the beginning of a new chapter that eventually led to the studio's closure in 2016.
Wah, wah, wah.
Mm-hmm.
But they are working on a new Fable, not Lionhead. Microsoft is working on a new Fable. So we finally get a fourth one.
Yay, finally.
I'm excited because I have played every game in the series.
Right, you are.
Okay.
But I have only played one myself, Dave, so I can only speak to that. So, cool, awesome. Hopefully, it's as good as the rest were because it was fun. I just remember playing Loot Hero, and that was it.
Yeah, I really like the Fable series. I remember when it came out, it was like a you can change the entire world with your choices type deal, and that concept wasn't fully realized in the first one. But as the series went on, it became more fully realized, and I despite that, I've really enjoyed all three of the games. I think two is the best in the series personally. So
Well, that's all fine and dandy, Dave, but I think people are here to learn about a different game. So, with that, why don't we kick it off with today's topic?
yeah, well, we should do that, shouldn't we?
Yeah,
Rob, we've talked about Kenji Eno before,
we have.
but never really in the context of his own work and the development studio Warp that we're going to be looking at today. As we get into parts of the story, it will undoubtedly sound familiar to longtime listeners of the podcast. And that is honestly exactly why we're returning to it today. Kenji is very much an interesting figure, and I will jump at any chance to talk about him again, as I already said. So, last time we went through this, though, we weren't really focused on him, but we were rather focused on one particular animator that worked for him. And Eno came up during that gentleman's time working with Warp. And so today we're going to focus instead on the entirety of Kenji's career as it leads into our topic today. In an origin story that many of us can relate to, Kenji Eno really enjoyed video games and music as a kid. He once was asked about his earliest video game memory, and this is what he had to say about it. So, the very first game I played was maybe Blockbuster, but I didn't think it was anything special at the time because I was very, very young. My next experience was Space Invaders, and I liked how it made you feel kind of different. And the first time I experienced it, it's like the first time you meet a woman. You feel something there, you feel some sort of chemistry. So I felt something like that for Space Invaders. That was probably love at first sight. The sound was also what attracted me to it. Back then, I was in elementary school, and some schools banned kids from playing Space Invaders because all the kids were playing it too much.
What? That's crazy.
So, Rob, it was like chemistry with a woman.
Yeah, I'm skipping on that. I don't know anything about that.
It was love at first sight. Made him feel
Sure.
some sort of way.
Good for him.
Despite his love of video games, it was more so, I guess, his love of music. He once said that more or less was the culprit for bringing him into the video game industry. As a kid, he said, I was really into techno music, and I liked the band Yellow Magic Orchestra, but a synthesizer had been too expensive to get, so I tried to mess around with music on my PC. I learned how to use it, and because this was a very long time ago, that meant I had to learn how to program.
Very true.
And like much of Eno's larger than life personality, the story of how he actually got into the video game industry is quite a tale too. So at the age of 17, he drops out of high school and he's just kind of not doing much with his life, staying home aimlessly, doing not much of anything. And one day he's sitting or laying around in his room and he overhears his neighbors talking about him. Things like, oh, he used to be such a good kid. He used to go to school every day. He doesn't do anything anymore. You know that kind of conversation.
Sure.
And so, yeah, right. Us
I
overachievers.
was gonna say no, not really.
So he hears this and he takes it to heart. Not for him, but more so because he felt guilty about how the neighbors were talking about his family, his mom and his dad, therefore, behind their back. And so he kind of used this as motivation to go look for a job, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he picks up this magazine that they have over there. It's called From A, and it's a job recruiting magazine. And he starts flipping first through the high paying job section because, same, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he sees an opening for a copy machine company. He couldn't recall the name. He said it might have been Canon. I don't know. He applies and he gets the job. He goes in for his first day of work, and within hours, he gets into a fight with the company owner and he quits.
Oh, wow.
So he takes magazine again, back to the magazine. This time he finds a job selling educational materials. He's supposed to go out in the field and sell, but the day before he starts, he steps on a plug and he hurts his foot. So his only option when he goes in is to do telephone appointments. And it's him and like 40 girls sending, making television appointments in this room. And he didn't like it. So first morning, again, quits a new job. Job number 2, both the first morning of employment.
Wow. That's
And so
something.
he returns to the same magazine, the same issue, right? Because
Oh,
he's just 2 days, 2 jobs type deal. And he goes back to that magazine looking for job number 3, and he finds one that happens to be for a video game company. Now, Kenji Eno doesn't have any experience in the field aside from 2 things. One, music programming that taught him how to program computers in the first place, as we just talked about. That's experience number 1, right? And the period in which he was learning about the synthesizer was elementary school. So back in the day, as he was learning how to use a computer, when he was still in elementary school, he entered a small regional programming contest for kids. And it was a contest in which kids programmed their own games, brought them in, and they competed with one another, which he did. And he won a prize. And he brought said prize into the interview with him. And that earned him an entry level job in the video game industry.
wow.
Times have changed, man.
Yeah, I would definitely say so.
I wish I could bring my elementary school spelling bee ribbon to a job interview to score.
Yeah, it might not work out so well anymore.
No, I don't think it'd work out at all. Now, there was roughly 10 plus years between that programming contest and this job. So Eno admits that he almost lost the job as quickly as he earned it because he found himself asking a ton of questions about everything that had changed, from how hard drives now worked to Windows, because Windows wasn't a thing when he first started learning computers, to, you know, how to use DOS, for instance. Like, these, everything about a computer at the time was new to him. And I mean, he almost tanked himself, frankly.
Right.
According to Eno, his first project with that company, Interlink, which no longer exists, by the way, was as a planner for a game in the Ultraman series called Ultraman Club 2. And that was developed for the Nintendo Famicom. There are a couple other Interlink games, Japanese only games, that have Eno's in the credits. And there's honestly, like, the company, if you look at their timeline, this isn't the first game, but Eno says it's the first game, so I don't know. You'll find out as we go along that he is a person who really loves to tell a good tale. He's a good storyteller. So, maybe the fact that that was the first significant title he worked on, that's in his mind where he started with the video game industry.
Yeah, perhaps it would make sense.
And like I said, there were other projects that worked on, but as time went on, he became increasingly less satisfied with his role in the company, and he wanted more control over his own projects. So he kept working, he saved up some money, and eventually he opened up his own video game company that was called EIM Limited. And EIM stood for Entertainment, Imagination, and Magnificence. That's my motto. That's my nickname, EAM.
Sure it is, Dave. Whatever you got to tell yourself to get out of bed in the morning.
He modeled EIM after Interlink because, frankly, in the video game industry, that's all he knew. But the key difference was that he was genuinely interested in making his own games. But that didn't really pay the bills. So in order to keep the company open, he took contract work. And although he was now making his own games, he was working with other people's licensed properties, right? Other people's characters.
Right.
And this became a struggle for him. The whole original games, but not at the same time. He said after a while, it just became too much and he found himself mentally unstable. He had people he worked with that were telling him how great it was to work with these characters and how lucky he should be, and yet he was yearning for original intellectual property, and he couldn't ever achieve that end. He had the company and it was making money, but he found himself again making games that he didn't want to create, so this took a toll on his mental stability, right?
Right. Understandably.
So EIM was founded in 1989, and as a result, he dissolved it in 1992. Short lived. He then began consultant work for one of the major automotive Japanese manufacturers.
Mm.
I said Japanese and automotive backwards, but you get the point. And he did that for a few years until 1994 when he visited Macworld 94 and a local video game expo. And these two expos revitalized Eno's interest in video games, and he found himself once again with the video game development bug. So, after a few years of a hiatus in 1994, he formed Warp Incorporated. And that's where we've caught up with him before, because on his team here at the beginning of all things Warp was Fumito Ueda, who would later go on to form Team Ico, and Team Ico developed Ico and Shadow of the Colossus. Now, we've done a whole episode on Shadow of the Colossus. If you'd like to know more about Ueda and Ico, Team Ico rather, and the games that they make, there's a whole episode. Really fascinating guy. Shadow of the Colossus is a phenomenal game. If you don't know anything about it, I highly encourage you to go check it out. It's one of those video games as a work of art type games, in my opinion, that if you were to say, show me the best you have, I think that would be on the list. So go check it out. Eno has said that in opposition to how he ran EIM, he modeled Warp after Panasonic's 3DO department because they were doing a lot of team up work with them. Warp and Eno's reputation during this period was really one of just craziness. To say that he and his company were unconventional is probably an understatement, so to speak. Now, we've talked about him before, and I've told this specific story before. It's my favorite story about Kenji, and it is always worth revisiting. So, we're jumping a little bit ahead. This is a few years after our topic for today. We'll come back. I'll make a point of it. And they're making another horror game called Enemy Zero. And Enemy Zero was supposed to be a horror game that was going to be released for the Sony PlayStation, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's 1996 at the PlayStation Expo when Sony invites all their developers to come and preview, all the games or show off the games for PlayStation. Big Sony deal. And it comes time for Warp to show off their new game, right? Everyone's excited about Enemy Zero. The game we're talking about today, ends up being successful. So it hyped up people for this next release here, which is later in time. And so there's a lot of people that were excited for this. So they get up, they go to show Enemy Zero. It's presentation time. Presentation goes off without a hitch. Eno gets up there, shows off the new game, and just as their clip ends, the PlayStation logo appears. And then it transitions into the Sega Saturn logo. And Eno basically says, we're going to be a Sega Saturn exclusive.
Jeez.
Now, the reasoning behind why he did it is actually related to our topic today. And we'll talk about that, we'll talk about that shortly, little spoiler. But Eno, who's basically a guy that doesn't like to follow rules at this point, basically comes up with this big FU to Sony and then goes through with it at this highly publicized event. He had a
Mm-hmm.
reputation for being a maverick, basically.
Yeah, sounds like it.
I
Damn.
mean, man was an interesting dude for sure.
Wow.
And there was There's other reasons too why Warp had a reputation. They were known for outlandish marketing. Another game of theirs was a collection of mini games called Short Warp. That one came with a condom.
Oh,
Yep. There was an adventure game called Real Sound that shipped with a bag of herb seeds.
herb seeds.
Yeah, I don't know why that is because Real Sound was an audio adventure game that like use sound as its. I mean, it's called Real Sound. What else would you expect it to do, right? Um, I don't know why herb seeds, but it came with
Hmm.
herb seeds.
Well, that's pretty cool.
But Warp kind of had a big following, a cult following. I mean, let's be honest, they weren't as big as like your big studios, but they had a bit of a cult following because they were known for these stunts, including one that we're going to talk about today, which is incredibly fascinating and relates to our title. And they were just known for these ridiculous stunts, and so I think everyone was just tuning in just to see what Kenji was going to do next.
Right. Reasonably so.
It was ridiculous. Before all of this, though, before the condom and the big FU to Sony and Real Sound, was our topic today. The horror themed interactive movie and adventure game titled simply the letter D. Rob, Kenji Eno might have been one of the most unpredictable and unconventional creators the video game industry has ever seen. I mean, who else pulls off a console switch mid presentation just to spite a business partner?
Right? That's a bold move. And it's that same rebellious, fearless energy that makes his games and his career so fascinating. The guy didn't just break the rules, he rewrote them.
Exactly. And if you got that same spirit, if you've got something to say or stories to share, podcasting is a great way to put your voice out into the world. And with Zencaster, it's never been easier to get started.
Okay, I know the drill. Hit me with the highlights. What makes Zencaster so awesome for aspiring podcasters?
With Zencaster is an all-in-one podcasting platform. You can record studio quality audio and video straight from your browser. There's no special equipment, no technical headaches. Just log in, hit record, and let your creativity do the rest.
So that's perfect for people who want to focus on content and not stress about gear. What about editing?
Zencaster's post-production tools have your back. It automatically balances your audio, removes background noise, and even cuts filler words like and It's everything you need to sound polished and professional, even if you're recording in your living room.
Nice. And once an episode's ready to go?
Publishing is a breeze. Zencaster can distribute your show to all the major platforms, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or else, all from within the dashboard. No extra steps, no hassle.
All right, I'm sold. How do our listeners get started?
Just head to zencaster.com/pricing and use our offer code, all one word, memory card lane. You can get 30% off the first month of any Zencaster paid plan. Whether you're just getting started or ready to take your podcast to the next level, Zencaster has everything you need.
So, if you ever wanted to share your thoughts, tell wild stories like Eno's, or create something totally original, now's the time.
Exactly. Go to zencaster.com/pricing, use our offer code, memory card lane, and start your own bold creative journey today.
Now, let's get back to D, the game that set the tone for Kenji Eno's signature brand of surreal cinematic horror.
Kenji Eno has said that D was inspired by a trilogy of graphic adventure games that were released for Polarware for various home computers in the 1980s, basically. It was three adventure games, and they were called the Transylvania series. The first one was called Transylvania. The second one was called The Crimson Crown, Further Adventures in Transylvania. And the third one was called Transylvania 3 Vanquish the Night. If I'm not mistaken, the original Transylvania eventually made it back to like a mobile release called Transylvania Adventure. But these were three graphic adventure games that were produced by Polarware or Penguin, depending on where it was published, between 1982 and 1989. And at this particular moment, when Kenji Eno is coming up with this concept, Eno, as well as Warp, is relatively unknown, right? Because he hadn't done anything really prior to this other than make a bunch of licensed titles, and that's not going to get you noticed per se, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And Warp is brand new. This is pretty much, it doesn't end up being chronologically their first release, but it does end up being their first significant release. Uh, Kenji kind of ran Warp in a way he said that he wanted balance. So if they were making a really, a nitty gritty horror game like D over on this side of the office, so to speak, they were making a mahjong game on the other side of the office,
Oh, geez.
which is literally what they did. They operated in a way that there was always balance. I told you he was a very interesting fellow.
I definitely agree there.
So there are actually a few titles that precede D for Warp's library, but they were the balance. D here was their first significant title, right? And when they were conceiving D, Kenji Eno felt like he was going all in on this game. You know, literally that if it wasn't successful, he was going to just stop developing video games altogether. Because after all, this is really try number three in a lot of ways, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, he tried it with Interlink as for another person, tried it for EIM with himself, and that didn't work. And so now Warp is try number three. And I guess in his mind, he decided the third time wasn't going to work, then maybe this wasn't for me.
Yeah.
So first, this team, they go into this just kind of thinking that they're going to make an adventure title, right? They really have the mentality that it's going to be a graphic adventure. So they sit down and they say, okay, where do we want this to take place? And they map it out. Because graphic adventures in the 80s were just that, right? You go from the cabin in the woods to the cave. You know, the cave has a lower level. You go from the lower level of the cave to the river, and you go from the river to further down the river. Like, that's how graphic games were built. You know, games like Zork and games like Colossal Cave Adventure. You know, the early graphic games, Transylvania included, were very much just it was so early on in the adventure genre, you know, the models he was using, that they didn't really have a story per se. You meaning gamers and their imagination, we filled out the story around it, right? Because take the Transylvania game. Transylvania, the very first one, you travel the countryside and you have to fight a werewolf, a vampire, a goblin, a witch, and an alien spaceship.
Yeah, it's kind of a lot.
And so you kind of fill in the gaps of what that means for a story, right?
Yeah. Or you just go
You
with the flow.
you just go with the flow. So the model that Eno was kind of working on was just go from point A to point B. And so that's where they started. They started by making an adventure game. And they basically programmed a game where you went from point A to point B to point C and so on and so forth. And they built out most of the game in this fashion, right?
Mm-hmm.
So at this point, you have a game and the whole structure of it is laid out, really.
Right.
Only then did they think about the story.
No.
But there's a problem.
Which
The
is?
whole game is built.
Mm.
How do you add a story to a game that's already built out? What do you do, you know? And so the answer for that team at Warp specifically was flashbacks. So they went back, they wrote a story, and they inserted said story as flashbacks throughout the entire game that they had just spent months building out. And it was at that point that Eno decides to make the game about Dracula, hence the D,
Ah.
right? Right?
Makes sense. Makes sense.
He said multiple times that when he went into it, he didn't have, because it's a twist. Dracula is a twist. And he has said multiple times that he didn't have Dracula in mind when he started the game at all. He didn't know that that was going to be the twist until he wrote the story. So he writes the story. They start putting together these flashbacks. They stick them into the game. And after doing that, Kenji Eno is still convinced that the game isn't going to sell because it's just boring. So, what does he decide to do to make a boring game less boring?
What's that?
He makes the decision to add violence to the game because, anytime something's boring, why not?
That's yeah, okay.
I mean, to be fair, conflict is what makes a lot of games interesting, right? Now that conflict looks different things. In a horror game, you can be the conflict of, your life always being in danger. But, he added violence. He thought that the game would be more interesting, less boring if he added violence. But there was one problem, Rob.
What's that, Dave?
This is 1995, 96, right? The game comes out in 95, I think, and then 96. And violence was questionable in video games at the time. At least the level of violence that Eno had in his mind was questionable, right? So this game 95 is 30 years old. So the game comes out. I keep Okay, so the reason why the time is messing up for me, I have this stuck in my head for whatever reason as a pre-Resident Evil game, and Resident Evil is 1996. So I don't know why, but I have them stuck together because to me this is in that, like, as the horror genre was like growing, learning. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Except that was just horror. This is horror adventure, and that's horror survival. But anyway, so this is 95, and in 1995, violence was a healthy debate across the world. You know, to put in perspective, we've talked before in our censorship episode way in the beginning that at one point the United States Congress held congressional hearings to talk about violence in video games. And that was violence when around games like Mortal Kombat, games like Doom, and games like Night Trap. And these congressional hearings were December of 1993 and March of 1994. So we're not that terribly far removed from literally a national conversation on behalf of our politicians that's all about violence in video games, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it was these congressional hearings that would eventually lead to a rating system, which is basically the goal of the ESRB. The ESRB came out of those congressional hearings, and the ESRB was formed in September of 1994. And we're talking April of 1995. So we're 6 months in to a rating system. And the rating system came as a result of violent games. And so violent games are still like, it's not okay. It's okay because now we have a rating system, but it's not okay at the same time, right?
Sure.
So, in the midst of these conversations, let's be honest about that. The game came out in April of 95, but they're making the video game in the midst of these congressional hearings, right? Everyone in the video game industry in the entire world, it'd be very hard for them not to notice this going on because it's going to affect them. It's going to affect everyone, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so as they're making this game, they're watching this all go down, and no doubt it's going to have an effect on what they're doing, or at least what they decide to do. Let's go. Eno knows that his game is boring. So he makes this super bold decision to fix that. And his bold decision is that he wants to add violence and cannibalism to the game.
Oh wow.
I mean, if we're going to go, we're just going to go for it, man.
Yeah, yeah, clearly. God damn.
I mean, violence is one thing, but cannibalism? That was just going to open up a whole nother can of worms.
Or
I mean,
something. Can of something.
who knows it? Well played. Who knows if he would even be able to get cannibalism past the censors? The violence, maybe, right? Because there were other violent games. But cannibalism, that was something that who knows if there was another video game that had that same topic at the time. I couldn't tell you. I didn't think to do that research. Now I'm curious. I'm going to write that down as a later topic for me. But who knows, right? And then comes the last thing. We know that the violence is going to get a mature teen or mature rating, but cannibalism is probably going to get mature. No one knew what a mature rating was going to do to video games. There weren't examples. We were 6 months in. We were 6 months in. That what we just there were so many unknowns as part of this conversation. It was undoubtedly a reason why Eno did what he did. He kept these violent sequences a secret from many people, including most of the team at Warp. So he added them without telling everyone, basically.
Oh, nice.
And when the time came to submit the game, once it was finished, he submitted a clean version without the violence or cannibalism for the ESRB, for Panasonic, who manufactured the game, for all of these companies to review. So they got a version without any of the violence, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then in order to make sure that his artistic vision stayed intact, so to speak, after they approved the clean version, he had to submit the master copy to Panasonic, who, like I said, manufactured the game, and he purposefully held on to the master longer than he should have. And he did that knowing that if he held on to it long enough, the only way to deliver it in time would be that he would have to hand deliver it to Panasonic in the United States.
Oh. So you just wanted to travel?
While he's on the plane to the United States to turn in his master, he switched the discs with the violent content, bypassing all censorship.
Oh my god. Wow. That's something else. Good on him.
It was yet another successful Eno adventure. Like I said, he's a very interesting guy. As the game did sneak by the censors, it was released first in Japan in April of '95. I think later. I mean, I know later in the year for the United States, we all got a an uncensored version. First Japan because they didn't have a choice, and then us because by the time it came out, the damage was done.
Right.
So D is first released for the 3DO, and it's successful. It reaches the top of the sales charts upon its release, the 3DO sales charts. And there weren't many hits for the 3DO in Japan. This is one of the rare exceptions to that rule. But I would like to say and return to where we started, because it was the PlayStation release of this game that really started Eno's feud with Sony. And this is the feud that led to his famous Sega Saturn swap that we talked about earlier. The PlayStation version of D was set to be published by Acclaim, but the product itself was going to be manufactured by Sony. And the company Acclaim / Warp had ordered around 100,000 copies of the game. And then Sony came back and told them that unfortunately they couldn't meet that quota because they were making other titles a priority in terms of manufacturing, right?
Mm-hmm.
We can only make so many discs. We don't have the time or capacity to make all 100,000 of yours. So we'll make 40,000, which ticked Eno off. When all
Understandably.
when all was said and done, they had actually only printed 28,000 copies.
Oh.
So we go from 100,000 copies planned to 28,000 copies. And
That's
this is
slappy.
the failure on Sony's part. It was their failure to meet their end of the bargain that led to Eno famously giving them the big FU when it came to Enemy Zero a few years later. Not only did they not hold their end of pre-orders, but there was marketing snafus, and there were all these reasons that Sony basically showed him that we don't want to prioritize your game in any way, shape, or form, and so we're not gonna.
Well, it makes a lot more sense now.
Makes a lot more sense. And so, when the time came to release Enemy Zero, which was the next horror game that the studio made, it was supposed to be a Sony, and Kenji Eno said, you screwed me the first time. My turn. And in front of all the media, video game journalists, because this was, the PlayStation Expo, it's covered by just about everyone. He basically announces, not making it for PlayStation, making it for Sega.
Nice.
D is an okay game, I will say. It's one of those that shows its age because it's an interactive movie. It's an interactive movie from the mid 90s. It's hard to do much with those because, when you have, it's just hard to do much with those. It's an okay game. It was received well. The 3DO version is typically seen as one of the better 3DO titles on the platform. That being said, it was later ported to the Saturn and obviously the PlayStation, and its reviews on those platforms were not nearly as good. Unfortunately, by the time I made the PlayStation, it was kind of sort of competing with Resident Evil, but not. It came out a little bit before, but it really didn't make enough of a dent by the time Resident Evil came out to matter. People kind of got it, and then Resident Evil came out, and then everyone forgot about it. So
Gotcha.
it was good enough, though. It developed its own little cult following, so much so that people became excited for new games from the studio, and the studio began to develop this weird reputation that we've already talked about with the condoms and the herb seats and the screw you, Sony. So,
Hey, just doing rebellious things.
well, beginning with his little Enemy Zero stunt, Warp began developing games exclusively for Sega. They made 4 games for the Sega, including Enemy Zero, and none of them did very well because, the Sega Saturn didn't do very well either. And as this is all happening, who we've already shown to have some mental instability in his life, was going through another period of mental instability. So the studio is in decline because the sales aren't where they need to be, and Eno just isn't mentally stable enough to support it anymore. And that just eventually led to the end. It all came to a head in 2000, and Warp officially disbanded for a short while. The company kind of refounded itself in 2001 as a company called Super Warp. Wow.
Yeah.
Super Warp was focused more on like odd projects, DVDs, network services, online music.
Hmm.
As part of that period, Eno and Super Warp they made a cell phone purchase interface for Coca-Cola vending machines.
Oh, okay.
They marketed cigarettes,
Oh,
and they designed a trendy hotel. How those things go together, I don't know.
you just got to use your imagination.
A year later, in 2002, after receiving an investment from another developer, the company changed its name to From Yellow to Orange, also abbreviated Fido, FYTO. And Fido made exactly 1 game. It was a puzzle game that was released onto the WiiWare store, so it was good. And it was called You, Me, and the Cubes.
Nice.
Eno ended up passing away due to complications from hypertension in 2013. And at the time, Eno in the studio was working on a game called Kekiyun. And Kekiyun was eventually picked up by people he worked with. They attempted to crowdfund it and finish the game. There's not much information out there on it. I went to the game's website, and there hasn't been an update on the website since 2015. I can't really find anything online about it, so I doubt it's even a thing anymore. It was kind of a nice gesture. They got together, said, "We're Warp 2," because it was largely people who worked on the original Warp team,
Mm-hmm.
and started producing this game. And for whatever reason, it just fell to the wayside. It was an online game of some kind.
Hmm. Weird.
As for D itself, Warp did make a sequel. It was called D2. D2 is actually the last game they made before they disbanded. It has a completely different story. Same characters,
Okay.
different story. Well, so that model, they use this model called Laura in all these games, actually. It's a kind of a Warp thing. Same model, not the same person.
Oh, okay. Convenient, I guess.
So D2 has a completely different story, not related to the first game. It wasn't received nearly as well as the first one. So that was kind of Warp's final swan song. And it fell flat, and Warp was no more. Kenji kept going with From Yellow to Orange until his death in 2013.
Damn.
And that about sums up the mysteries of D.
Indeed, it does.
D itself really didn't make a big impact on the video game industry. It's a fun game, it's got a cult following, and aside from Kenji Eno's fun stories, Warp itself didn't do much to impact. Its significance is probably in the people who came out of Warp. I had already mentioned Wada from Team Ico, but there were also people who have worked on like Final Fantasy Advent Children, for instance, was on this team. And oh, the guy who made Macross,
Mm,
Ichiro Itano.
yeah.
Anyway, so Warp more so Warp's significance to video game history is in the people that came out of that studio. And we've talked about that time and time again, where the legacy of the studio, as it kind of spreads its wings, people, this project falls flat, but these people go on to do great things. That's definitely the case here, right? Because like Final Fantasy VII, big series, Team Ico, huge game. Like I said, some of the best rated games of all time. So good things came out of Warp, just not so much Warp itself.
Very fair.
With that being said, there are all those other pieces of the puzzle, right? And we always encourage you to learn more about those pieces. We've done an episode on Team Ico. We had done episodes on, we talked about in the beginning the Dragon Quest series and Ninja Gaiden and all these other fun ways that this all comes together. And so we have all these old episodes and other stories that we highly encourage you to go check out. And of course, you can do so by going to our website, which is www.memorycardlane.com. And Rob, what else can people do on our website?
You can find a calendar of our future episode topics to have an idea of what we are going to be talking about in our coming episodes.
Good
You can
plug.
find a link to our Discord where you can come chat with Dave and I about either episode topics or anything gaming related and possibly even not. You can find access to our Patreon where you can help support us, get access to ad-free and unedited versions of our episodes. And you can find links to our social media where I am on several platforms as Rob_O_Raptor and Dave.
I can be found on various platforms as David is wrong. Each week, we'll tell you one story relevant to the current week in gaming history. It can be about a game, the people who've created it, a console, a technology. We've done it on a museum before. Just whatever topic I want to tie to this current week, we roll with it. And every week, when I sit down to research another episode, I learn new things. And I get super excited because when I learn new things, I know I get to teach y'all new things. And it's a fantastic cycle of learning and teaching and learning. And in recognition of said cycle, we like to talk about our takeaways. So, Rob, what did you learn today?
Well, I think my favorite takeaway has to be something you mentioned pretty early on, and that's that after a lot of difficulty finding a job that he was willing to and able to do, it was an award from elementary school coding that got him a job started in video game design.
I don't
That's
know
just
if they, I mean,
fantastic.
that story is directly from an Eno interview. Directly from an Eno interview. And look, he was a larger than life but enigmatic figure. He did not give a lot of interviews. There is a but side note, I'll put it on the YouTube notes. There is a really fascinating documentary that was created on YouTube that's on YouTube that was it's in memory of Kenji Eno that talk a lot of people who talk about their time with him. There are people don't really have bad things to say. He's a fascinating feature. Seemed like they decently worked with him. His They were wowed by him, like many good figures in the video game industry. Yeah, I don't know, man. I hope that's a real story. It came right out of his mouth. So he didn't interview. He didn't give many interviews, and that one's right there, front and center. So it's fascinating.
Yeah, that's fantastic. That's my big takeaway. How about yours?
I really like the old switcheroo on the master disc.
That was the second one for me.
I think
That's
that's so fascinating.
yeah, that's a ballsy move, and it's crazy that it worked out the way it did.
Right? Yeah, I man knew what he was doing.
Yeah. Oh yeah, for sure.
That's just a fun story. That's a really fun story. So
No, I agree. It absolutely is.
all right, Rob. Well, like I said, that'll sum up D before I wrap it up and take it into next week. Is there anything that you'd like to add to today's episode?
I will just take a moment to say thank you so much to all of our listeners for joining us as we learn about all of these fun episode topics week in and week out. It means the world to have you along as we get to learn about our favorite things. So thank you.
Mm-hmm. As we leave the unsettling world of D, we're reminded of how the game's minimalism and airy atmosphere defined a unique corner of gaming history. Kenji Eno's bold vision and pioneering use of cinematic elements showcases the artistic potential of the medium. So, whether you're exploring a nightmare or solving cryptic puzzles, always remember the transformative power of creativity in gaming. Next week, we're leaving the chilling halls of D behind and stepping into the radiant hand painted world of Okami. Released in 2006, this masterpiece blended Japanese mythology, stunning art, and the innovative celestial brush mechanic to create a gaming experience like none other. Join us as we uncover the story of Amaterasu, celebrate the artistry of Clover Studio, and explore why restoring beauty to a cursed land is a brushstroke of genius on next week's vibrant trip down memory card lane. Do the thing.
Dibba-dim-dap-dap-dap-doo-ah.